First of all, I'm for at least 3 reasons really happy to be here. The first reason is that I'm in Warsaw, and I really like to be in Warsaw, and when it's even nice weather, I mean, I'm already happy for that. But I'm also happy to be in a room and address a group of academic leadership, supervisors, doctoral candidates, professionals in doctoral education. This is not something that happens all the time. So for me, it's the ability to speak to everybody who is involved in doctoral education, having together after a debate makes me even more happy. And I'm also even more happy because myself, I studied philosophy and history, did my PhD in history, so I am from the Social Sciences and Humanities. So I'm already, even though I don't really speak the language, I feel very much at home here. So thank you very much for inviting me. So just what I will talk. First of all, I will introduce ourselves, the EUA Council for Doctoral Education. I will a bit speak about doctoral education as a meeting place and as a journey also to develop something like a doctoral identity. I will talk about the survey we did on the landscape of doctoral school and doctoral education in Europe, and I will also address some emerging topic. And I will try to make it not too long because I'm really looking forward to hear all your opinions and then having after this discussion. Doctoral education as a meeting place, or this, I mean, we meet already here, so who meets actually in this famous doctoral education? First of all, it's a meeting place between research and higher education. As it was said, you get a degree at the end, you will a higher education degree, a third circle in the context of Bologna, but at the same time is research going on. So the two big missions of universities come here together with more societal mission, which is also part. It's a place where doctoral candidates meet, different backgrounds, social, cultural, national. We discussed before also about the international context of doctoral education here in this institution. It's a place where doctoral candidates and supervisors meet, where people in the institution meet, professors, researchers, professionals, administration working together to make the doctorate successful. It's also a place where institutions meet, joint doctorates, interinstitutional collaborations. It's a place, and we will talk about it later, where we meet within the institution, between disciplines. You have interdisciplinary doctoral programs here. So also here a meeting place where sectors, private sector, public sectors, university, and so on, work together. So the question of doctoral education as a meeting place is quite key and brought us also here all together. Now, when we speak about doctorate, yes, the doctorate is actually one of the oldest aspects. So, I mean, the concept having a doctor is very old, but what we speak today about doctoral education is actually very young. It happened in the last 20 years when in Europe quite the bottom-up process started addressing how do we make doctoral education and the doctorate successful, adapting to the current need of the current society. And for this, about 15 years ago, in Salzburg, a group of universities came together and had this seminar on doctoral programs for the European Knowledge Society, starting a process which we call now, because it was started in Salzburg, this kind of Salzburg process, which had some very key principles I will talk after. And then 5 years together, they came again, 5 years later, they came again together and developed new recommendations, more practically how to revise what was discussed 5 years ago. And 3 years ago, there was another paper called Doctoral Education, Taking Salzburg Forward. I mentioned these 3 documents because we will talk about them, and they're also all available also on the CDE website. I will give you after the indication. Now, what is the aim of doctoral education? So I start with the recommendation of 2010, and it said actually clear the goal of doctoral education is to cultivate the research mindset, flexibility of thought, creativity, critical thinking, in the base of a concrete research project. So that's why you are not student just, or not just, but you are really early career researchers doing your own research. But same in the Salzburg Principle of 2005, it already said, yes, the core of doctoral education is advancing knowledge, advancing knowledge for supporting the society to research, but at the same time, there are other needs. There is need of employment market. We all need also a job after our PhDs, which is wider than academia. In many countries, until 90% of doctoral candidates work actually in a context outside of academia. Maybe doing academic research, a lot of research, I will talk after that, but it's not only into academia. So how is it now? When we talk often about the doctoral journey, we feel like ideally we go, we have our doctorate, there is at the end a big mountain, which is the thesis, we climb it, and then we are in the sun and full of happiness. So this may be one concept, and then ideally we would say, okay, we are here in the university, we make our doctoral school, we leave university, we have 3 paths and all go into happiness. However, reality is sometimes different. Sometimes you don't just go straight away, but you have different encounters, different ways. You start the way, you go out, then come back again. So it's not a very just a journey. It's a journey of encounter, of working together, and of different paths, which sometimes seem to be maybe a bit chaotic or difficult to handle, but we are equipped of it. And I don't know who of you is familiar of Eurodoc. This is actually the Association of it's the European Council of Doctoral Candidate and Junior Researchers, and I know in Poland they have a very big representation of doctoral candidates and they're successful. And they just 2 weeks ago started with a graph, which is I think quite helpful, asking what skills do you get as a doctoral candidate to be able to walk through this journey. And they found out, yes, there is a lot of skills you will earn as doctoral candidate. You will have research skills, and again, the research is in the center, and as you said rightly, write your thesis, but at the same time, writing the research, but also supported by your education, by the doctoral education, you get communication skills, you get interpersonal skills, you have a certain mobility, you learn, you may learn different sectors, you go to other places doing your research, you learn how to communicate, how to work project, how to develop project. So there is a multiplicity of aspects, and this is what doctoral education is today. This is not what you can tell one single supervisor who has a lot of obligation that all of this aspect needs to be covered. So it's the institution together with the supervisor working to make the journey of a doctoral candidate to make it successful. Okay, so this was, I just was happy to give you a little introduction about this concept of doctoral education today. But now let's go to the landscape of doctoral school and doctoral education we have today in Europe. What we did last year, we made a survey asking all European universities, asking where are you today with doctoral education? How is it organized? What are your priorities? We will produce a report, or we are producing it. It will come out in beginning of next year. So, but I'm happy already giving you some insights, which hopefully may be also useful for our discussion today. So, one of the first results, which I said that's actually what we discussed before, but it has been proved again, the common goal of the doctorate of doctoral education is research. We asked all the institutions to what is the main work a doctoral candidate in your institution spend time, and it is all institutions actually said they deal to a great extent they work on scientific and academic research. So this is the most work do. But then when we ask them as well, what do you do else? There is also a significant work in research-related administration, in teaching. And for instance, teaching was an interesting question because we had a very high degree in Poland. So, and as I learned in Poland, teaching is an important part of European doctoral career. So there we have a big difference. So, but average, it's an important aspect. And yes, and yes, and internship for instance, training and so on play also a role, but the research is in the center. And when we ask the institution, how do you see your doctoral candidates in the future? Again, there was a very high number saying, yes, these are the future academics. This is the place, doctoral education, where we'll have the future academics for our institution, and this is important. But what we also said, and this I would say is new and wouldn't have been so much 15, 20 years ago, is when we ask them, do you see them also as highly skilled knowledge workers, as people who work in other sectors as academia? The number was also not the same high, but at more than half said, yes, we see them as highly skilled knowledge workers. And as you can also see, researchers outside of academia, this was also quite high. The number, for instance, of leaders and managers, which we asked here, this was a bit lower, but this is often to do that a lot of what we see also in other projects we did in the EUA, usually as a doctoral candidate, you won't start as a manager in your job, but doctoral education very often is very useful for your future career to get early seniority, because you had all these transversal skills, which are very important for the future many years after you finished your thesis. So again, when we ask them on what are you focusing, research competencies, how to do research was very important. And we asked all institutions, so it was, of course, also a lot of natural science. And in natural science, you have a lot also of skills working in a lab. I would say in social science and humanities, it may be a bit less, a bit different, because from my experience, a lot is learning by doing, by writing, when you do philosophy, so you don't need maybe a one-year course working in a lab, but also in the social science and humanities, there are skills which can be learned. So a research competency, generic academic competencies, also the knowledge how to write proposals, it's also important elements of the doctoral education. Teaching competencies, again, here we have a big difference in Europe, but also management and leadership competencies, 50% of institutions, this is also an important competency. So again, doing research is extremely important and it's in the center, but there is so much more you will get during your doctorate. Now, another question we asked, and this is always not the most important thing, but without funding it's really difficult to survive and pay your rent and to do all the great things you want to do, is we asked them, what is your funding about? And here we can see it's extremely diverse. It extremely depends on the countries, and in the same countries you have very much different sources. But we can say most of the funding we have today in Europe is public money. It's a society funding doctoral education. This is very common, but you have also from people from self-funding, from international money, but also employer, depending on the program. So key in Europe is at the moment public funding. One result of this is that we got a huge variety of status. Now, in some countries, this is really, there is a law who says all doctoral candidates are students, or all doctoral candidates are employees, and so on. There is, for instance, let's say Sweden, where about 95%, I just read, have employee status. In the UK, they have the status of students. In some countries, they may have legally a student status, but the financing show that they are more employed. So it's a huge variety and diversity of status today in Europe. However, it is understood the importance, and here's the consensus of all the process, that the most important is indeed that you are at least practically considered early career researcher. Now, when we speak about the organization, we see again a huge diversity. So doctoral education is probably one aspect where we won't find a one-fits-it-all approach, where the age of let's say first the national context, the context of the place where you do it, but also of the person plays a big role, and it's a shared responsibility. So when we asked in one of our question, how do you organize doctoral education? Then very often we hear at the same time very different organizational umbrellas. So you will have a lot of institutions who say we are organized in programs, and at the same time we have an institutional doctoral school. And maybe we even have in the discipline form of organization. So there is not, for a lot of institutions, it's not about having one structure for everybody, but having a structure where you may have a structure who support maybe more the transversal skills, which can be all the institution, and a structure who is really dealing with more specific question of disciplines and so on. Then we asked about how is it, do you work together with other institutions doing it? This is still very low, so usually doctoral education is institutional. And then the last question was to say, or is it only led by an individual supervisor? And here we say only about 9–10% of institutions say today, no, we don't have doctoral school, we don't have doctoral programs, we have the single supervisor in the more traditional relation without any institutional involvement actually here. And so we can say today we have 90% of doctoral education. There were about 15 years ago other surveys on this question, and here we had maybe 23% would say, yes, we have the institution. So from a big majority without institutional context of doctoral school, we are now in a Europe where doctoral schools are quite standard. When we asked about, do you do it on a disciplinary level or is it the faculty level? Also, here we have quite a difference, a diversity in questions. Some it's more disciplinary, some is faculty, some are both. What we still relatively low, and we may discuss this when we speak about interdisciplinarity, doctoral schools which really deal more kind of challenges or themes and not on discipline are relatively low. So only 10–50% at the moment in Europe would say that. Now, to end, I would like to talk about supervision, which is, or not the end of this aspect, is we asked who supervises your doctoral candidates, and what we see here, it's also extremely diverse. You will have institutions where you have a single supervisor, some you have internal team, other have team of with other university. This is very often also related to regulation in your institutions, and of course, again, on disciplines. How do you work it? It's maybe different in physics than in literature studies. What we also see, we have now a lot of regulation about, and this shows what has happened now with the structuralization of doctoral education, things like appointment of supervisor, reportings, feedback structure, agreements. This is now very much often in place, often with the aim to say actually doctoral candidates, since they're at the beginning of their career, are, and sometimes also, I wouldn't say weak, but they need also a certain protection. So a lot what happened today in doctoral education is also to provide to early career researchers, doctoral candidates, this protection that you say we need a certain regulation, how this relation work, also to avoid that misunderstandings, and also to regulate a bit this power structure, which we can find. Now, the last part is of my presentations is priorities and emerging topics. We asked all the institutions what is actually the priority, the strategic priority for your institution in the future. And strategic priority doesn't mean actually that things can't be a priority but still be important. So it's not a normative question, it's more a political question about, or governance question, what you have to deal at the moment most. And here we see funding is indeed in all Europe a significant issues. We see this also in other work we do in EUA universities. Especially when we look here in doctoral education, where you do a lot of wonderful things, we have heard this morning, these also need to be funded. There is a lot of institutions also aim at an increase of doctoral candidates, and also this needs to be funded. So appropriate funding is definitely a key priority in the institution. The second one I will talk about this is research integrity, research ethics. Then we have this internationalization, attracting doctoral candidates from abroad. It's also important. Here we have a huge difference in Europe. There are some countries where about 40% of doctoral candidates are not, have the last degree not from that country. They are doing the doctorate. In other countries it may be 1%. So there is a huge inequality in Europe at the moment about this, and it's definitely also something to address and discuss how to deal with this, and it's often also connected to the funding. Career development is a topic which, a lot in doctoral education is about career development, especially when you increase doctoral candidates, and there is a huge need in society for having this highly trained knowledge worker, if we call them like that. And then there are some other aspects. Now, I talked about this Taking Salzburg Forward paper, and in this Taking Salzburg Forward from 2015, there were some key priorities identified for doctoral education. And as we saw, research ethics, one of the priority is the question of research integrity and research ethics. So why is this such an important nowadays for doctoral schools, but for the university as such? We are in a constantly increasing competition context. There is the pressure to show innovative results as early as possible. You address the predator journals, which also make the money sometimes, saying, we publish everything, and then you get also a problem. There is an increasing awareness of the public on ethical questions, on what does it mean, and we have here, of course, also different disciplinary difference. It may be different in psychology, how to deal trials than it is in literature studies, but the integrity, the question, what are the standards, are increasingly important, and here institutions play a very important role to train doctoral candidates and early career researchers. What is actually research integrity, or also ethical questions? So what research is also ethical? What is responsible research and innovation? These are all aspects which become more important, especially since we have new technologies with new challenge. And also here, like everywhere, disciplinary differences are important. Then we have this digital challenge where open research, open education, which is becoming more also important, social media, big data. We need university who know how to deal and who support doctoral candidates, again, how to deal with digital challenges we have today, artificial intelligence, for instance. One aspect we work now also a lot in EUA, how to deal with that. There is sometimes also the need to training for supervisors, because you may have 30 years ago done your PhD or your doctorate, which was very different than it is nowadays. So there is also the question of training supervisors, like also in research integrity and other aspects important. The question is, what does it mean for doctoral education when it comes to output? Is there new ways to communicate your research, which didn't exist 20 years ago? And the principle is here to say it's not about saying digitalization is bad, but how to deal with it. Now, we have globalization of research. I spoke about that. Increasingly global research, new technologies supporting internationalization, the role of international mobility. Now a lot, and when we spoke about the priorities, the third priority was actually related to internationalization, attracting doctoral candidates from abroad. And here also the institutional responsibility towards doctoral candidates who come from abroad. So when you have somebody coming here from another country, what can institution do to support them? And I'm very sure what I see here, that this is also here the idea to support doctoral candidates and the international capacity building. So how can we make doctoral education internationally on certain standards? How can we exchange experience? And of course the CDE I work for is very much about this. The fourth topic and last topic we had in this is the knowledge society, and here a lot today is about societal impact. And when I'm here on a university on social science and humanities, this is really also an opportunity for you when you do your doctorate. A lot what we do in the social science, or actually everything, has a societal impact. A lot of people will have their career outside of academia, especially in social science and humanities. Doctoral candidates are somehow the ambassadors from the universities into the society, because what we develop, a lot will go into societal role and will be able to share the experience as researchers. And here the role will speak about intersectoral mobility, joint doctorate is important, and also the role of regionalization. Now, is there any new topics? I think there are a couple of new topics which is really new in the discussion. One issue is the mental health and mental well-being of doctoral candidates. For instance, in the UK, in Ireland, it's now a big topic. In other countries, a bit less. Doctoral education is it's of course a challenging, demanding experience. Now, some research came up who said that the number of doctoral candidates also having really more serious also issues like mental health issue, mental well-being until depression, and so is actually higher than in other cohort and the same society. So one topic we discuss now more and more, and we will also discuss it in the CDE. How can we support doctoral candidates in this difficult journey? How can we distinguish between, okay, what is just a challenge of a doctorate, but when we also have the responsibility to say, it's not, yes, finish your doctorate, but it's not about being perfect and being depressed that you are not perfect. It's about making this experience a positive experience, and it is a positive experience doing the doctorate, as it was said before. Here we need also more research. The postdocs, this is of course not a new topic, but more and more we need also to discuss what happens after the doctorate. There is also a significant increase of numbers of postdocs, and I'm sure some of you may also stay in academia doing the postdoc career. How can we support here as well the career appropriately, that people who decide to stay for a certain time in academia also can make a career, and often maybe a bit less in the social science and humanities, but in other disciplines it's very common that you do a postdoc and then go to industry. So this is becoming also, and how can we, what we'll do in the doctorate, what is the difference between the postdoc and the doctoral candidates? And the last topic, and then I will end, no, still one, is research assessment. This is becoming also really important. The career, I mean, there are two, I mean, first of all, of course, doing a doctoral thesis, you will be assessed. You will have the discussion. So this is first. At the same time, more and more careers are also dealing, where do you publish, what do you publish? There is at the moment a huge discussion about the journal impact factor. Is this really a useful way to evaluate? So is it really so important where do you publish, or is it not more important what you publish? So here it's the discussion, how can we find new ways of assessment? This is very much related also to open science, because open science, so the question of open access and so on, is only possible if you don't limit yourself to maybe 3 subscription-based journals and everything else doesn't work. So, and here again, in the social science and humanities, we have a huge variety of ways how to publish. We have books, we have journals. How do we deal in the future with that? How can we show, maybe even with our experience in our discipline to other disciplines, how do we deal with evaluation and research assessment. Here the institution has also the need to, there is often not the right decision, and I remember when I was myself, I did my doctorate, we discussed, of course, okay, should you write now 2 journal articles, or don't write journal article, or write 3, or write book, and then it depends with whom you had a coffee, you will get a complete different answer. So there is probably not the right answer I can tell anybody of you, or somebody can tell you 100%, but we need here also discussion about what are the best ways to do it and how to maintain this quality and show this quality. And here it's really an opportunity for the SSH, Social Sciences and Humanities, to engage in this discussion. And then there are certainly more topics we may address later. So I'm 30 minutes, so thank you so much for your attention, for listening, and I'm looking forward to discuss.
How you see, Alexander, now the future of doctoral schools, that it's varies so much across Europe. There are various programs within the schools. There are programs who are schools themselves. It's a little bit journey question towards the discussion panel, but do you imagine it's much more towards single discipline or more towards interdisciplinary kind of structures, facilitating structures? What is your experience while talking with so many people who have different experience, as you said?
When I was looking in what happens in the last 10, 15 years, and EUA Council for Doctoral Education was founded now 10 years ago, actually, at the beginning it was actually easy. When you have 27%, let's say, of doctoral schools, and your aim is to have 100 or 90%, then you have one goal, and then say, okay, let's explain or even promote doctoral education in Europe. So it's a challenge, of course, and I'm extremely impressed what others before me were achieved or what the universities here have done, but it's somehow you have one goal. Now we have no doctoral education, and often it doesn't make sense when you have something just to say, oh, we have it, so we have to change everything. So it's not about now having the big changes. But at the same time, and that's why I was thinking to spend some time to address all these challenges, the demands are increasing. So now you have to support career development, you have to support open science, you have to support research integrity, and sometimes you have even less money for that. So how do you deal with that? It's not just about to say we need more, because life is, you don't live forever, and doctoral education, it doesn't make sense to have it too long, also for the personal development. So what the big challenge, I would say nowadays, and which makes also this work in doctoral education so interesting, is what are the priorities? What can we do? What can we add to doctoral education? While, as it was shown, it's about you doing your research, you doing your thesis. This is what you have to finish the thesis and send it to your supervisor. It's not about just learning and being a student. So what can be added? What can be made? This, I would say, is the biggest or is a challenge we have nowadays in doctoral education. And that's why it's always interesting also for me to hear from you, especially also for doctoral candidates, what you think is actually what is needed today as also skills. When we speak, and I don't want to start already now because we'll speak a lot about interdisciplinarity and disciplinarity. I think I can go from this answer and say it really depends. There is not one way. I think what I can imagine we could discuss later is about when it makes sense, the interdisciplinarity, and how it makes sense and how to do it. So I don't see, the numbers showed that it's still, let's say, not a huge numbers of institutions really having these interdisciplinary programs, and now it's, I would say, more open to discussion what happens in the future. And it may also depend how the interdisciplinarity is understood, but especially how it is put into practice.
Thank you very much. Let's share how you imagine your doctoral education. Those of you who are the first year here, but also I see advanced students who are at the end of the trip. So how you imagine or how you imagined your doctoral education, Arthur?
Hello. From the United States, I'm third year, and I'm from the United States, and a lot of the model there is that PhD students are integrated into university, and they get a stipend, and they're more or less employees of the university. And so I saw that map that you had of how the PhD candidate looks in each country. So what do you think of that? Because that was that's a challenge here, yes, that I can be a PhD student, but that I don't get supported by the university, or there's some type of scholarship, and it's very different. Like I am integrated, but I'm not, and I have a lot of my fellow PhD candidates that also work full time, but then do their PhD, and I'm just wondering how much that affects the experience, right? Because you're a student or you're not a student. You get people that come right from the master's degrees and keep going into academia, but then you're getting another people that have worked in industry and are coming back. So it creates very different, it's very hard to kind of create a community, yes, that you keep talking about when, when you have to work or you have already other priorities in your life and you're not so dedicated and you don't have the money. So like, what do you think of that? Like, do you see one single model, or does what do you think?
Yes, I mean, as you said, the US model is really different, especially also when we look about, first of all, how long it takes to do the doctorate, also how the percentages of doctoral candidates who stay in academia are usually higher than in many European countries, and also the status, it's much more student-centered and the idea that you are a student. Now, Europe is much more, for historical reason, for social reason, and so on, much more diverse. I don't think it is helpful now to compare the US model with the European model, because the contexts are completely different, and I really don't think that you could take the US model and put it into practice in Europe. It just wouldn't be possible, and I don't really see how it would fit here. And I also don't think that you should take in US just the European model and do the same there. The question is more what we can learn from each other, and I'm sure we can learn from the US, and we can also share our knowledge from the US. And I mean, we work also well on the level of the CDE. There is the Council for Graduate Schools in the US, which are good partners. So there is an exchange actually happening at the moment. Now, about the community feeling, again, I mean, it's not only the doctoral experience. I mean, I must admit that I know more about the community feeling in US University from some TV shows, but it's definitely what I know. You have this idea of a campus, which is completely, the idea of a campus university. This is, of course, also different in Europe depending on the context. So you will find institutions who are more focusing on this US structure. You will have others which are completely different, and you will find everything in the middle. Already on the student status, when we speak about doctoral candidates, also the same. And yes, it's a challenge finding the way of of collaboration. And it was said you are not alone when you do your doctorate. Even when you do it, maybe self-funded, working somewhere else, doing research somewhere else, there is a need to find ways to communicate with your peers, and it's extremely helpful. And here, yes, I mean, I don't think I can answer this for each institution, but it's important when you work on doctoral education to find ways of encounters, to find ways of working together and discussing, and to finance this as well, how to do it. But what I have seen that there is a lot of intense and new initiatives here in Europe exactly addressing this.
I would like to add something to that, because that's very important thing you raised about the community building. And there are a few dimensions of it. First of all, community is in you. So it's up to you how you make your community. You can make personally, face-to-face, and strengthen it digitally. Yeah, so it's not that the community goes digital and that's it. We need personal contacts, and our university is made to meet up. There was the Doctoral Education meeting place. Please remember that digital space is to strengthen, to accelerate your true community. Face-to-face meeting, personal meetings, personal talks, yes? And what is also important is that, of course, you are here to take up something with you, to put into suitcase of your intellect, of your development, of your education, but also to bring in, to share, to give. So community is not about taking, but also giving. Yes, please remember about that, that making science, making research is reciprocity. Okay?
And maybe just if I can add, and this will be the discussion maybe also when we speak about interdisciplinarity. I mean, a lot when we speak about, for instance, transversal skill trainings, these are often the places where you will meet other people. So often, I mean, this is the experience at least I had and many have at a certain moment of your writing of your doctoral thesis, you feel you are the only person in the world who really understands what you are doing, and then it's a challenge to explain it at least to your supervisor, and you're already happy if there are 2 people in the world who understand it. And then you try to explain it to your friends, and then it becomes more difficult, and then maybe in some moments you are able to explain it to your friends, and I think this is the moment you should finish your doctorate, because you won't get further of that. But when we speak especially about trainings, this is sometimes the place you can really speak about somebody with another discipline. And maybe you will speak about communication, but you can speak with someone doing, with a sociologist when you are a literature scholar, and here you can discuss together on a third topic. And this is quite important for this community feeling.
Yes, and that's why PhD conferences are about that. You need to explain other disciplines where your PhD is about, which is later on in our inauguration day. Please share with us not only questions but also your ideas, why you came here, what for, how you imagine your 4 years of your doctoral education, how you imagined being on the 3rd, 4th year, how much you are disappointed, how much you are happy about this. Please share, please engage a little bit, yeah?
Can I say something?
Yes. This is our chairwoman of the PhD students government.
Thank you. My name is Dominika, and I am the PhD student on the 3rd year. And when I was starting, and I was sitting like a few of you a few years ago in the same place, I heard that the most important advice is to remember that those 4 years it will just whoosh, and there won't be enough time for doing the PhD. So I would like to share my thoughts with you that I am on the 3rd year, and I can absolutely assure you that if you thinking that maybe 4 years it's a long time and I have a lot of time to do my PhD and it seems forever. So I have to admit this, you are right, it seems, and that's it, because it's really long, it's not a long time, it's not the period that it's enough to do everything we want. And the advice that I will have is to communicate, as Professor Grabowska said, communicate with each other, communicate with your professors, with your promoters. From my point of view and my experience, my promoter, besides the huge knowledge and an experience, he has an open mind and open heart to talk with me and to share the time for me to work with the PhD thesis. So I have one question for Mr. Professor. What is your advice for the people who are on the first year, first days in our school, and they're just starting the journey with PhD?
Okay, that's a big question. I would say, and I mean, there is for the supervisors are much more experienced in that and can certainly give you much better advice than I can do. But I mean, we should not forget, it's somehow also a privilege we have here. I mean, spending 3-4 years of your life doing something you're really interested in. I mean, this is not, a lot of people can't have this. And when you do an academic career, I don't know how many professors can spend 4 years only on doing 80% of the time research on one topic, because you probably have, I have never met one, but after retirement, it's when you're emeritus then again, but so probably it's the only phase in your life you really will have the ability to spend really working on one topic you like. So first of all, like your topic. There will be maybe a moment you will be not so happy anymore because things are sometimes challenging, but when you choose, and I'm sure you all came here because you wanted to do a doctorate, because you are interested in this, because there was this need to learn something, but especially to investigate something. So enjoy it, understand that it's a special time, but also be realistic in a way, it will also end one day. So it's important to get to this final situation of sending your thesis, and it's also normal that some may be also nervous, what will I do later? This is also something in the social science and humanities. Probably when you do it in law, you may feel I'm a lawyer and we know what law you do. When you do maybe cultural studies or sociology, it may be sometimes more difficult. You may feel that happened to me at least when I did. Or I mean, I did history, so I said, everybody told me, you are becoming a history teacher, and I said, probably I will not. So you will teach in university? I said, yes, no, I don't see really a chance in that, even though I liked it. So it's normal to get nervous, but what we can say, the degree of doctoral candidates making a career is in all Europe, in all countries I know, higher than for many other parts of the society. So it's again, it's a privilege. It's not something to be afraid of, but also acknowledge these moments which may be difficult in your doctoral work, and you're not alone. I think this is important. You have your peers, you have your supervisor, you have the institution, enjoy it, but also be able to ask. So in research, often it's not that, as you may as a student, everybody comes to you and helps you. You need some time also to ask and to know what you would like to ask. This is a short idea.
So I wanted to take the opportunity, first of all, thank you for your great talk, but also to meet and ask a person who has seen so many different PhD schools and different environments. And I wanted to ask you a question. First of all, one is about a kind of a historical perspective. Do you think that the requirements for the PhD are changing over time, and in which direction that is going? Perhaps it depends on the discipline, perhaps on the country or the area, whatever. So that would be my first question. And the other question related to that is, do you think that competitiveness of science has an impact on how PhDs candidates work, function, and function in their environment as well?
Yes, it's really difficult about the historical question. I remember when I studied at University of Zurich, we had a library. I mean, I really like libraries, and one good thing about libraries, sometimes there is a corner with very strange things. So there was one corner where you had all the doctoral theses from 1900, from end of 19th century. And then I looked at this, and these were like books of 30 pages. And I was like, wow. And then you read it and you must say, well, it's not always so exciting piece of scholarship. So now it's hard today to explain. I mean, there was much less opportunities at that time. So it was not, you go on the computer and you will get 50 books or whatever. So I have a huge respect of this time. But so it's really not so easy to understand what is the difference of requirements. But of course, we have more possibilities today, which also leads that things becomes more complex and more demanding. Now, doctoral education, when I did myself, I started with a more classical, you did your thesis and nothing else. I don't know if it was easier or more difficult in that system than you do it today. I think you have today much more support opportunities, and it may depend also on the person how to deal with it. So it's about finding the right equilibrium and the right way to give. I mean, it's also this big discussion, what should be mandatory, what should be voluntary. What I have seen, a lot of universities go more for the voluntary idea, because especially it's a difference if you're 18 or if you're 45 when it's about developing your professional or communication skills. Or not 18, it's a doctoral, 30 or 45. So I would say, yes, it became more complex, more demanding. There's also more support. And here it's necessary to find the right way for the right person. Now, competitiveness, I don't know, to be honest. Also here, Tomo as a historian, if it was so different in the 19th century, because of course you have much less people, but I think it was always difficult to get a good job in a university. So the competitiveness for the academic career was difficult. It may become more difficult today just because, I mean, when you had, after the Second World War, especially in the 60s, 70s, where in Europe a lot of universities, or at least in Western Europe, a lot of universities opened, it may have been easier than today, where you have actually a structure here and you may have also to fight more to get positions. So, and it's also more international, which may also increase certain forms of competencies. Now, I would say so yes, I would say it's more competitive, but the more you find also a way of alternatives to academic careers, and you don't see the doctoral education as a battleground for the 3 professorships, which may be able in 10 years, then it may be even, you may even feel less competitiveness when you are able to see more ways, and that there is not the first and second class paths, but there are different paths you can take, and each of them will lead to a fulfilling career for you.
Hi, okay, so my name's Camille. I'm the second year in cultural studies. So I just wanted to follow up on the thought about how privileged we are as a community, not only in terms of like doing what we want to do and what we are interested in, but also in terms of having certain cultural and symbolic capital that other communities might not have within a society. And I personally believe that there is a certain social responsibility that comes with it. And I wanted to ask, how do you think it should be incorporated into doctoral programs, if it should be incorporated, first of all, and second of all, how advocating for minority groups should sit within that?
Yeah. Well, thank you for this really great question. Actually, I will be able to answer you more in a year, because next summer we will have our annual meeting about the societal dimension of doctoral candidates, and we exactly are now discussing to plan maybe exactly in a session on this, on the societal engagement of doctoral candidates. So it's definitely also one of the emerging topics when we speak dealing with society, which I don't think I can tell any institution, even less in a country I'm not so familiar with, you should do it this and this way. I don't also think that the institution itself should tell now to doctoral candidates, you have to engage in this and this way. But definitely, and this is my personal view, but I think a lot of people share it, doctoral education should leave space and give space for this kind of societal engagement and societal activities. And now it's a bit more also to discuss how can it be made concrete, but I know also of a lot of doctoral candidates who do it either being part of their research or also as some outside of research activities. And yes, the social capital, as I said, when we speak about this doctoral identity, it's of course that it's something special, and I agree with this responsibility. It leads to the doctoral candidates, but also to the whole institution, but it's not only for doctoral candidates.
Let's have the final question before we will have the final performances of our choir.
Okay, thank you. So can you tell us more about mental health of PhD students? Like you mentioned that you have more questions and you don't know everything in that topic. So can you tell us more about that?
Okay. Yes, no, I would say that this is a new topic. It's a topic which often is not uniquely, I mean, it's not only, first of all, we really need to do more research. And I mean, here, I'm sure there's a lot of experts exactly on this topic about how can we compare this doctoral candidates population to other parts of the population. It's also about to understanding exactly, I mean, often you will hear this answer, yeah, well, it's hard to do a doctorate, so of course you are sometimes a bit under stress, so this is part, and it is part, it's stressful sometimes, but we really need to develop, and I would say nobody is there really when to have to draw this limit between the kind of stress, which is, I wouldn't say natural actually, but it's a collective experience we may have during the doctoral education, and what really is something which is dangerous, which is harming to the person, and which has to be addressed also by the institution. So actually I can't give you now, tell you more. There is a lot, and that's one reason I also addressed this issue, as we are also in a moment of awareness raising, though this is a topic which have also to put a bit on the agenda, especially in contexts where mental health is maybe sometimes also a sensitive issue, often also everywhere actually, sometimes with taboos also related. Not everybody's happy to talk about that, so it's also to finding way how to create space where we can talk about this, but also to find very concrete answers. So it's not about talking, it's about how can we change this in a good way.
Sure, thank you.
We cannot offer you here in the doctoral school psychotherapy, but what we can offer you, we can offer you support and peer mentoring, that you can also offer support to each other, which is sometimes much more important than support from the supervisor, that you know that someone is in a similar position as you. So our mentoring experts, Joanna and Justina, run these peer mentoring groups. You received information about peer mentoring groups in your welcome letters from me and the doctoral school team. So please read what are the topics, how you can participate. Also, if you feel that you have a need to consult, to talk about your challenges, as I said, not in a psychotherapy way, but in a mentoring support, please also contact Joanna Szędziemiańska and Justyna Ziółkowska in Wrocław, that they can facilitate you with finding some solutions or some tools how to deal with your challenges. So thank you for these questions, and thank you for openness, that you were able to raise many topics. We still need to challenge them. We need to discuss them in here, but also we will be discussing them and sharing internationally in the forum of European University Association Council for Doctoral Education. We are happy that we can be a member of this club, and as I said, share, learn, and discuss. So Alexander, thank you very much that you visited us and you shared with us all your insights.